If you're a fan of this channel, then you have seen me analyze the original version of the characters in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles franchise. And while original almost always means the Mirage comics, there are cases where characters were introduced in the adaptations of the comic. But it's not often that I have to review a character like Hun that originated in an adaptation and that was adapted into the original comics. This worked well in some cases, like what happened with Harley Quinn from the Batman animated series, but other times, fans felt it was a marketing decision rather than a writer's choice. So, did Hun's adaptation feel like a marketing strategy? Join me in today's video as I review how Hun was adapted into Hunter Mason. In a previous video, I explored the original version of Hun, but here's a brief refresher in case you missed it. Hun was created by Lloyd Goldfine, with the creative input of Peter Laird for the 2003 series. He started as the leader of the Purple Dragons, later becoming Shredder's right-hand man. However, Hun's allegiance shifted after discovering Shredder was an alien who had deceived him for years. This revelation led Hun to transform the Purple Dragons into a more organized criminal empire. He was also essential in Casey Jones's origin. The Mirage version of Hun was named Hunter Mason and was adapted by Tristan Hugh Jones and Paul Harmon, but the story behind his adaptation was filled with unnecessary twists and turns that I will explore now. The first indication about Hun crossing over to the original comics was during one of the many Q&A posts on Peter Laird's blog. There, the Super Turtle fan, Taka, asked Peter about his favorite TMNT villains. In the middle of his answer, Peter mentioned that while he wasn't too excited about Hun initially, he came to like him as an enemy of the Turtles over time. He even suggested that the character could be crossing over into the comics in the near future. I already explored Peter's objections about Hun in that other video, but at this point, it is safe to say that the adaptation was already in motion. But the origins of how Hun was adapted date back to a story that Tristan Hugh Jones wrote for Tales of the TMNT, Volume 2, number 36, which was also Tristan's first published work. This story was about the aftermath of the classic saga, City at War, and it had a noir sensitivity to it very much in line with stories like Batman Year One. Readers were interested in seeing a continuation of the story, and Tristan started working on the concept for two characters, Diamondback and Copperhead. The first one ended up being rejected by the editor, and Copperhead turned out to be inspired by Hun but more badass. Very much like Hun, Copperhead was hardly seen and acted as the right-hand man of Diamondback. You probably noticed the snake motif, and yes, that was important to the story, as instead of the Purple Dragons, he belonged to the Pit Vipers. However, Copperhead's name had a different origin. On one occasion, he received 2 bullets to his skull. Doctors placed a metal plate on his skull to repair the damage, and since his pain receptors were seriously damaged, he was incapable of feeling pain. Also like Hun, his motives were mysterious, and his loyalty was unquestionable. After some editorial staff changes in the book, Tristan pitched his stories again without the rejected Diamondback, and this time around, he decided to leave Copperhead as a nameless character. But Peter was indeed interested in adapting Hun back to the comics, so when he picked up on Tristan's efforts to create a Hun lookalike, he gave Tristan the okay to use Hun directly. With Hun now in the story, the 2 distinctive elements of Copperhead, his metal plate and his inability to feel pain, were left behind. Now, it was time to create an origin story for the character. This was also a delicate situation because the Mirage Comics turtles were awfully efficient, which meant that their villains didn't last long. Hun and many other characters introduced in Tristan's Gang War saga were coming to fill up the turtles' rogue gallery. Going by the name of Hunter Mason, Hun debuted in Tales of the TMNT, Volume 2, number 56, with a cover date of March 2009. The issue was a collaborative effort, with Tristan Jones as the writer, Paul Harmon providing art, Eric Talbot on letters, cover art by Paul Harmon and Steve Levine, and a frontispiece by Michael Dooney. Hun's introduction in the comics shares similarities with its cartoon portrayal, particularly his association with the Purple Dragons and his traumatic impact on Casey Jones. This was perhaps the most controversial aspect of Hunt's introduction into the comics. They changed Casey Jones from being a vigilante inspired by bad television into a traumatized anti-hero. The traumatic event happened when Casey was 17. The Purple Dragons were running a protection racket, and after Casey's father refused to pay, they burned down his auto shop. They may or may not have also killed him. It's not completely clear. Seeing all this violence unfold in front of his eyes, Casey got infuriated and tried to fight Hun. This didn't turn out well. Casey got severely beaten up, and in an inspired attempt, Casey stabbed Hun in the side of the neck. In retaliation, Hun threw Casey headfirst into the pavement. The cranial damage left Casey in a coma. The incident left Casey with frontal and temporal lobe injuries, which resulted in cognitive disabilities and some behavioral and emotional problems. As you can see, this event serves more as an origin story for Casey Jones than for Hun. And speaking of Hun, he had bigger things to worry about. His right-hand man struck a deal with Officer Gordon Miller of the NYPD, getting amnesty in exchange for enough information that could put Hun in jail for life. This deal was likely orchestrated by the Foot Clan, rivals to the Purple Dragons. During his time in prison, Hun heard about Casey Jones and fantasized about him being that same kid who dared to fight him, wishing that one day they would have a rematch. After 11 years, Hun got out of jail with the help of the mysterious Lin Koyobashi. Upon leaving prison, he confronted his former right-hand man, who, in his absence, helped the Shredder wipe the rest of the Purple Dragons and then became the leader of a new gang, the Black Dragons, whose sole purpose was to be the Foot Clan's enforcers. But who was this Lin Koyobashi? She was a Foot Clan mole in the NYPD, who was also the leader of the Shredder loyalist faction of the clan that caused so much trouble during City at War. It was implied that she was responsible for putting Hun behind bars in the first place. After taking care of the gang's leader, Hun also took down the rest of the Black Dragons and started rebuilding his criminal network. Upon hearing about Hun being released from prison, Casey, now a father, put on his mask again and went after the Black Dragons. He inevitably ran into Hun, who, after recognizing him, finally saw the perfect opportunity to teach him a lesson. Casey escaped from Hun, only to find him in his own apartment, waiting for him, with April as a hostage. Fortunately, the Turtles were also there, and after putting Shadow to safety, they came in to save the day. By the time the police arrived, Hun was already gone, and Casey's home was no longer safe. It was then that Casey, April, and Shadow decided to move to the farmhouse in Northampton for a while. But this wasn't Hun's last appearance. He started doing business with a criminal network that included others like Lin, King Cobra, a character inspired by Diamondback, and more. However, the story remains unfinished because the franchise was sold to Viacom. Had the Tales book continued, Tristan would have continued exploring this and other characters for the Turtles Rogues Gallery. But specifically for Hun, it would have been revealed that he had a 13-year-old niece in witness protection. King Cobra would have sent a Mirage version of Touch and Go to capture her, and they would have had competition, as the Foot Clan would have been also trying to get to her. The Turtles would then have helped Hun's niece escape from Touch and Go. After investigating the case with Miller, they would have discovered that the reason she was in witness protection was because of Hun. With everyone interested in capturing her, and with her foster parents killed by Touch and Go, they would have decided to send her to the farmhouse to live with Casey and April for a while. I will cover all that's known about the whole Gang War saga in a future video. So, was Hun's adaptation merely a marketing ploy? Clearly not, as even the concept of Copperhead was intended as a stand-in for Hun. But how well received was this adaptation? Here, the answer becomes a bit more complex. Generally, Tristan's story and his rendition of Hun were well received, with many appreciating the respectful and fitting adaptation to the tone of the comics. However, I observed mixed reactions regarding the changes to Casey Jones' origin because Kevin Eastman originally created him as an antithesis to the typical traumatized vigilantes found in comic culture, like the Punisher and Batman. His simpler origin story, though straightforward, effectively complemented the TMNT Comics of that era. From my perspective, this iteration of Hun had immense potential. Given more time, I believe it would have been developed more fully. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like we will ever see the end of his arc. What are your thoughts? Do you like this version of Hun? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. See you in the sewers.